Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about the Russia-Ukraine war and some of the ongoings of that conflict. And so we're going to start off with what is happening in Europe in regards to its response to Russia's invasion, the special military operation in Ukraine. And so Vladimir Putin says here, Russia had no problems with Finland until it announced its intentions to join NATO. Now they will have problems. I hereby order the recreation of the Leningrad military district on Finland's border. The Leningrad military district operated from 1918. Demilitarization of the district began in November 1990 after the USSR signed the Treaty of Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, which introduced restrictions on deployment military formations and units in the northwest of the USSR, later Russia. The Leningrad military district was totally disbanded in 2010. And so we see here that this area of the world is becoming more prone to conflict because Finland decided to join NATO. And so remember, Russia's original reason for entering Ukraine was joining NATO, which was an alliance that is hostile towards Russia. They make it very clear they're hostile towards Russia. They need a reason for existing, and so they have to pick an enemy to go against, and NATO's enemy is Russia. They would love to make their enemy China as well, but it's hard because it's supposed to be the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And so they need to kind of reinvent themselves if they want to pivot and fight against China. But in the meantime, they are trying to pick a fight with Russia. Russia at various points in time actually wanted to join NATO because they didn't understand that NATO was looking to still pick a fight with them after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And we see here that Finland, I think, made a huge mistake, which is that they just saw what happened to Ukraine. And it was because Ukraine wanted to join NATO, and now Finland joins NATO. So what does that mean for your country if you join NATO? It means that Russia feels that you're going to be hostile towards them, and that means that a conflict is likely to arise from that. And so I don't see how leaders of Finland, if they were actually looking out for the best interests of their country, would turn themselves into a proxy for America instead of being a neutral buffer zone like they used to be. Like, there were not conflicts between Russia and Finland for a long, long time, many decades, okay? And so it doesn't really make sense for this type of thing to occur if your leaders are actually looking out for your interest. If your leaders are actually puppets of the United States, this makes a whole lot of sense. So when I talk about having a lens through which to view the world and or to come up with accurate predictions, if your lens through which to view the world is that European leaders, or at least it says that European leaders are puppets of the United States, then this outcome of Finland joining the United States and joining NATO makes a whole lot of sense. If your lens tells you that European leaders are looking out for the best interests of their countries, it does not make sense for Finland to join NATO at that point, because there are a ton of buffer countries that Russia did not intervene in. They did not have special military operations in. And so it does not make sense if you are looking to avoid hostilities to join NATO at that point, okay? So again, it's all about having the right lens through which to view the world. So let's move on and see what else Vladimir Putin has to say here. So Putin admitted in a recent interview that he was a naive person in the 2000s, believing that the West did not want to confront the Russian Federation. I actually talked about this over a decade ago, and I'm glad that Vladimir Putin eventually came around to it. I said, like, Russia needs to work with China. I think they form a very synergistic relationship. They can learn how to collaborate in Central Asia by having Russia provide security, China provide the economic, the capital for the Central Asian countries, and they learn to do that. I talked about how United States needed an enemy, and so they needed a reason for NATO to exist, and they wanted to break up Russia in order to surround China from more sides. And Vladimir Putin, for the longest time, I would say really for the first 10 years probably of his reign as leader of Russia, so from like 2000 to 2010, he really didn't understand this. He admits this here, that he was very naive about the character of the West. And so let's see his exact words on this. Putin said, I had a naive idea that at the time the Western civilized world would accept Russia because it has completely become a different country and no longer has ideological confrontation with the West. So the way I view Russia now and the way I view China is they're very pragmatic countries where they will take on any characteristics that would benefit their country and get them ahead. And so if there are certain things that work now that didn't work a decade ago, or that will work in the future but aren't working now, they're willing to take on those characteristics, whether it's a socialistic system, a communistic system, capitalistic system, any type of system. They're willing to take on those characteristics if they think that is the most beneficial at the time. They're not ideologically driven, they're pragmatically driven. And I think that's a great mentality to have, and it's obviously working for them. But anyways, let's move on. It says, I thought the West only supports separatism and terrorism on the territory of the Russian Federation out of inertia. And again, that's the thing where, like, he thought that if he's like, well, if I just join NATO, they're going to quit being hostile towards us. And they're just hostile because they remember the Cold War. And he thought he can reinvent the image of Russia, and that was just not the case, because let's draw a parallel here. When I talk about social justice warriors and how their degrees and their jobs rely on needing social justice conflicts for them to supposedly solve, they are creating their own work in order to justify their existence. The same is occurring here on a national and international level, where NATO is saying, we need a reason to justify our existence as a military alliance. And because of that, they need to look at Russia as a hostile power that they come into conflict with. And so that's why I say my lens, my paradigm through which I view the world, is extremely accurate at being a predictive machine and predicting future events. And so if you understand human beings are supposed to be predictive machines. And you should always be working on honing your predictive capacity so that you're better at predicting things in the future. And so right now, I predicted these things over a decade ago, and pat on the back here because it seems like I was correct. It wasn't just inertia pushing NATO to fight Russia. It was they needed a reason for NATO's existence. And so luckily, Russia realized this soon enough that they were able to pivot towards China and form that synergistic relationship. And I haven't talked about this in a while, but they need that synergistic relationship where they are a very sparsely populated country, even if they have over 100 million people. It's just not a particularly densely populated country. A lot of the area isn't particularly hospitable to live in. And due to that, they have a ton of natural resources, but there's kind of a finite limit to their manufacturing capacity. And obviously, everyone has a finite limit, but they need a country that has a higher capacity for manufacturing, that could specialize more in manufacturing, in order to have a symbiotic, synergistic relationship with, because they have so many natural resources, they can't handle turning that into completed goods all on their own. And so it used to be the case that the United States, they understood this, and which is likely one of the reasons they never pivoted enemies, because they wanted to stop Russia from collaborating with Germany, because Germany was a manufacturing powerhouse, and they wanted to make sure they didn't collaborate with Russia. And so that's why Russia could never join the EU and never could join NATO. But Russia realized this. They realized the hostility of the West, and they pivoted towards China, which was becoming a manufacturing powerhouse. And so really brilliant strategy, and they did it like just in the nick of time, because they were really running out of time before their country would be completely defeated by the West. And so just series of very fortunate events occurring. Anyways, this goes on to say, but the reality is that the West doesn't need such a big country. Yes, I talk about this all the time, where the United States hates countries that could be competitors in terms of manufacturing and just natural resources. And so what they do is they try to break up those countries as much as possible. They got a little bit lazy when it came to allowing Russia to continue to exist for as long as it did after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they also got very lazy when it came to China, because they thought they could overthrow China. Sure, the Tiananmen Square thing didn't work out, but they thought with places like Xinjiang and Tibet and Hong Kong, they thought they had enough ways of fomenting tension within the country and enough ways that they could get their resources within the country through things like NGOs, non-governmental organizations. They thought they could control China. So they got very lazy in terms of having all their manufacturing capacity within one country. And we realize the repercussions of that is that the oligarchs in the West, the Zionist oligarchs that control the West, are starting to lose. That Russia and China have figured out the situation. They figure out the hand that they've been dealt. They figure out the strategy that the Western world is using, and they're countering it on a massive scale. the pivoting point really seemed to be after COVID. They like really started to take the initiative here and put the United States on the back foot. But anyways, he says, reality is the West doesn't need such a big country. The West has decided to follow Brzezinski's plan to divide Russia into 5 parts. A divided Russia will lose sovereignty and be unable to defend its own interests. I talk about this all the time, which is that the West seeks to extract resources and exploit the populace of countries. If you have a large country in terms of natural resources, in terms of population, in terms of manufacturing capacity, anything that could give them a degree of sovereignty, the United States hates that. And so they want to break up countries like Russia, countries like China. And so he goes on to say, the West can plunder resources from it as it pleases if it breaks it up into 5 countries. So anyways, if you found this video to be informative, interesting, helpful, please give us a thumbs up. It does help us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel for more content on YouTube and Rumble. Please, through word of mouth, tell people about our channel. We are trying to get out there. We know we're being suppressed in the algorithm, particularly since we started to talk about Zionism. And leave us a comment in the comment box below. Questions, concerns, critiques, anything like that. I do love hearing from you. I do read all of them, and I do respond when it seems like it's necessary. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.